I wanted to share my top 5 garden projects from 2021. Let's dive right in. Number 5 is adding David Austin roses to my garden. I ordered 3 English shrub roses and I was so excited, as it was my first time adding roses to the garden. They came in a bag, bare root and already pruned, ready to be planted in late winter. I kept the tag on for a while to remember which one is which. The varieties I chose are adapted to be grown in pots, and I also got mycorrhizal fungi to help with root growth. I soaked the bare root roses for a couple of hours before planting and used brand new terracotta pots that were large enough to sustain the roses. I sprinkled a bit of mycorrhizal fungi and backfilled with pre-moistened compost. So just 2 things to be aware of: center the rose in the pot, of course, and be careful about the height of the graft union. I made sure to keep the roses well watered again so that they would root in really quickly. And just a couple of weeks later, we already started seeing signs of first growth. So I added some bark to, again, keep a lot of moisture in the soil, fertilized at the first signs of growth, and then the 1st of July, we got our first flush of blooms on the Lady Gardener. It was the first to bloom. I did have to treat for aphids, but that's okay, the problem subsided very quickly. I'm so pleased with these roses. They haven't skipped a beat, and actually the Lady Gardener was still flowering in November. I chose 3 varieties: the Lady Gardener with large apricot blooms, Royal Dahl with still apricot blooms but a little bit smaller, and Wild Eve with light pink, really large blooms. In the life of my small garden, there are 2 key planting schemes that I do every year. Tulips that I plant in the autumn for spring show, and dahlias that are pre-sprouted in the spring for late summer to autumn show. This year I planted 750 spring bulbs in my small garden space. I'm so excited. I do that in containers and of course in my one sunny border. I love putting together small containers, and this year I use a bulb starter to help the bulbs root in a bit quicker. For the border design, I chose a color scheme and then varieties that will bloom throughout the spring, so from very early all the way to late spring, so that I can have months and months of colors. And I put my tallest varieties at the back. For that, I had a planting plan, of course, and I chose a mix of tulips, daffodils. I also added some hyacinths, and I will also have some muscari and alliums. Anyway, a lot of beautiful color to look forward to. Planting in the borders especially is always a big project, and this year I ended up finishing in the dark, which was kind of my medieval moment. We'll have to wait next spring to see the bulbs that I planted this year, so to make us wait, this is a little bit of footage of what the garden looked like last spring. And just like that, when we're still enjoying the tulip show, it's time to plant the dahlias. So I've created containers that are more specifically suited to smaller varieties, but you can also wait and plant them in the ground when all the risk of frost have passed. So the process of pre-sprouting is really simple, really. All you do is you put your dahlia in a little bit of compost, you label it, of course, to remember what's what, and then you keep it in a frost-free place that's ideally a little bit warmer, like a heated greenhouse or at least a cold frame, and the tubers will need a lot of light to start growing. Keep them watered as they grow, dead it regularly, and you'll have months and months of gorgeous blooms until the first frosts. Yesterday I harvested the last of the flowers. Those are some gorgeous examples that I had growing this year. Purple Gem, this beautiful deep purple one. Kevin Floodlight, beautiful dinner plate. This is a small example, but the blooms got completely huge. And then Ailey Jane, another cactus type. We had a glorious show from July all the way to mid-November. I'm so pleased with the crop this year. So it's time to save it to, of course, replant it next year. And at the end of November, or sometimes all the way to December, as soon as the foliage dies off, it's time to leave the tubers, clean them, inspect them, and then store them for next year, and the cycle can start again. Oh yeah, just make sure there's no moisture that goes into storage, otherwise you'll have rot. I love growing squashes, pumpkins, courgettes, anything. They're really easy to raise from seed and produce a ton of gorgeous fruit with little effort. I love using pumpkins also to decorate in the autumn, in the home, or just on the front porch, and of course they're really good for eating in a ton of recipe. So I went all out and sowed over 20 varieties of pumpkin and corn. I do that at the same time typically. So a lot of labeling was needed to remember what's what. To show you real quick the different size and types of seeds, so even though they all look the same, so they're slightly rounded with a pointy end, depending on the size of the fruit you have different size of seeds. So here for example this ornamental stellina has small fruits, so small seeds, and something like tonda padana or crown prince have much bigger fruit, so bigger seed. Sowing seed is super easy, they go pointy side up. I think it's the maybe most said phrase in the channel, pointy side up. And I typically do that in March so that the plants have enough time to grow on to be ready to be planted. So typically the sprouting is pretty quick when the temperatures are warm. Protect those from late frost at all costs, and also from slugs. I lost a ton of seedlings to slugs. But really quickly they start pushing out the true leaves, and once they have 3 true leaves, the plant is robust enough to be planted at the allotment. I do it that way because I don't have running water in our vegetable growing space, and that's easier for the plants to be planted when they're already ready to sustain themselves. To plant there, we give a good water, and I use cardboard to try to reduce the weeds that grow around it, and also that prevents too much moisture from leaving the ground. And those were planted at the beginning of June, and a couple of months later, it's time for the harvest.
So beautiful. I think it's been eaten a bit, but it healed. Oh, and the colors go really well together. It's a whopper, and look at all that texture. It's really beautiful. Must be several kills as well. So I'm really happy with that vine, even though it produced 1 pumpkin, it's massive. This one is called Dahlias à fruits longs. It's a French variety. I grew quite a bit of French varieties. It means it's a courgette from Nice, which is a town in the south of France, and fruits longs means a long fruit. And you can tell, it's kind of long.
It was a gorgeous harvest, and if you follow me on Instagram, you've also seen how I use those to decorate in my home. When we moved in, we really loved the house, but the front garden was horrible. Just under the bow window, we had an edge of boxwood that was dead, diseased, and whatever else, like there was no life in it. So we removed that. Earlier on in that space, I actually had a gorgeous drift of spring bulbs, and I had done in the past another revamping project with a whole lot of perennials that I had to lift, and that will be reused in other projects this year. This was all to make room for that gorgeous tin bass planter that we found in an antiques fair in London. After a little re-edging, preparing the container, and filling it with soil, we were ready for a gorgeous load of plants. This was actually my largest planting project, and I absolutely loved it. This was by far the most exciting planting and design project I've done on the channel. I selected a lot of plants that would carry a lot of winter interest so that I could have year-round interest at the front of the house. So I picked some grasses, I reused some camellias that I had, and also chose evergreen plants such as lamb's ear, hookras, and ivies. I also allowed for more seasonal interest with some echinaceas and pansies. When designing, I also kept in mind the color scheme, so I chose pinks and silvery foliage, and I think all the plants tying really well together. I also designed additional containers as a grouping to be around it, and I planted several shrubs like Pittosporum, Euonymus, and a beautiful hydrangea. I really love how this turned out, and there's a lot more pictures of it on Instagram if you'd like to check that out. And now for my favorite project of the season, planting a wildflower meadow. I've been wanting to do that for a very long time, and last year I turned my sad little piece of lawn that we have in the back garden into a gorgeous space. The first step was to remove all the weeds, of course, and then we covered the soil to make sure we could naturally kill off the remaining weeds. Actually, I hadn't picked a tarp that was opaque enough, so make sure to do that if you attempt this project. Then we had to improve a bit the soil structure, so we just manually rotavated the soil and added amendments, so just 2 bags of compost. When sowing seeds, typically a fine tilth is recommended, so we use a rake to break up any bigger pieces and prepare a really fine grain for the seeds to adhere to. And now for the fun part. I mixed a bunch of different seeds together, so some natural wildflower mixes, so natural to the UK, and then other additional white flower seeds that I wanted to try out. Mix them all together and then just spread them out. Watering was really important then to make sure the seeds were moist enough, and even when they germinated, sometimes if it was really windy, I would water twice a day. And then at the beginning of July, after months of quick growth, we had a gorgeous show. We had lots of color with the oxeye daisies, the cornflowers, some poppies. It was beautiful. And the bees also loved it. We really enjoyed that space, and it was really nice to create something for wildlife to enjoy as well. Towards the end of September, it was time to cut back the meadow and start saving some seeds to resow next year, although I'm expecting a lot of these plants to self-sow. This is an example of how the oxeye daisy's flowers would fade, and you want to wait until all the petals have shriveled to have a chance of seed production. And this happened, of course, for all the varieties. To prepare the meadow for winter, I had to cut it down to avoid it getting completely soggy. I created some bundles that I tied together with just a bit of jute twine and then attached it on bamboo sticks. This was to allow wildlife to escape, and also if any seed would become ripe, it would fall down and be ready to grow for next year. I also cut the grass really short in preparation for winter, and I will keep it really short over winter. I'm not going to give any additional feed to the meadow because wildflower meadows don't need that, but I'll probably be resowing my seeds. Once the seeds that I harvested were dry, it was really easy. All you have to do is squish them out of their seed pods and then store them in a cool, dark, dry place in paper envelopes. I'm ready for another project. Well, it's a top 5, but I couldn't resist adding one more project that's very dear to me, and that's growing rhubarb. We have a lot of plants at the allotment that our plot neighbors let us use, and it's my favorite vegetable/fruit to harvest from and to cook with. It's so beautiful looking, and it's one of the first crops to be ready for the summer. It's such a blessing to be able to harvest from June all the way to September sometimes. And it's super easy to cook with. All you do is remove both ends, the leaf and the piece that was attached to the stalk, and typically have to prep it with some sugar to drain excess moisture. I love a tart. I'll try to include the recipe in the description. This is a recipe from a French cookbook that I love. It always turns out really delicious. And my second favorite thing to do with rhubarb is jam. So for that, you need to leave it with extra sugar 24 hours in the fridge, and then we typically add lemon as a natural preservative. Let me know in the comments if you had a favorite video or what type of video you'd like to see more of. I'd love to hear your ideas. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.